In the medieval world, long before bright packaging, catchy jingles, or late-night advertisements, people still found themselves wanting something small to eat between meals. Hunger arrived slowly, often without urgency, and food was approached in a patient, practical way. What we might now call junk food existed in a far simpler form, woven quietly into everyday life. These foods were not glamorous, not indulgent in a modern sense, and certainly not eaten for pleasure alone. Instead, they were plain, filling, and familiar, meant to quiet the stomach rather than excite the mind. For most medieval people, daily meals were repetitive and predictable. Bread formed the foundation of nearly every diet, and its presence was constant. Because of this, many small foods eaten during the day were simply variations of bread itself. Leftover loaves were dried, hardened, or toasted again to create portable, chewable snacks. These pieces of bread, sometimes dipped in thin broth or weak ale, could be eaten slowly while working or walking. There was no rush, eating was calm, and chewing took time. In towns and cities, where markets and streets brought people together, simple street foods became common. These were not rich or luxurious items. They were affordable foods made in large batches, designed to be eaten by laborers, apprentices, and travelers. Small pies filled with coarse vegetables, beans, or scraps of meat were sold warm but not hot. Their flavors were muted, relying on salt rather than spice. A person might buy one in the morning and eat it slowly over several hours, taking small bites while resting or standing quietly near a wall. Cheese was another common snack-like food, especially among peasants and workers. Hard cheeses, aged just enough to last, could be carried in a cloth and eaten in small pieces. These cheeses were often dry and crumbly, requiring patience to chew. There was no indulgence in the taste. Cheese existed to sustain energy, not to entertain the senses. It was eaten alongside bread, sometimes with a raw onion or a few herbs, creating a meal that felt complete without being memorable. Sweet foods, which today define much of what we call junk food, were rare and subdued. Sugar was expensive and uncommon, so sweetness came from honey or dried fruits. A small honey cake, dense and heavy, might be eaten on a market day or a religious festival. These cakes were not soft or fluffy. They were thick, slow to chew, and often slightly dry. Eating one took time, and the sweetness faded quickly, leaving behind the familiar taste of grain. Children in medieval towns may have experienced something closest to modern junk food. They might receive small treats from bakers' burned crusts, leftover dough baked hard, or thin wafers made from simple flour and water. These were not colorful or exciting, but they were different from daily bread, and that difference alone made them special. The act of eating them was quiet, often done while sitting on stone steps or leaning against wooden doors. Fried foods did exist, though they were far from common. When oil or animal fat was available, small dough pieces could be fried into rough shapes. These were eaten warm, with a texture that was firm rather than crisp. Fried food was not eaten casually every day. It appeared during fairs or special occasions, making it rare and ordinary at the same time. There was no excess. Portions were small, and eating was slow. Ale played a role in medieval snacking as well. Weak ale, low in alcohol, was consumed throughout the day, including by children. When combined with bread or cheese, it created a sense of fullness. Ale softened dry food and made chewing easier. Drinking and eating blended into one calm routine, repeated day after day without thought. What is striking about medieval junk food is how unremarkable it was. These foods did not demand attention. They did not distract or stimulate. They were eaten quietly, often alone, sometimes in silence. A person might not even remember eating, only that hunger was gone. Food existed as part of the background of life, much like the sound of footsteps on stone or the steady ticking of time marked by church bells. In this world, there was no concept of guilt associated with eating simple snacks. There was also no excitement. Food did not interrupt the day. It flowed gently within it. A piece of bread, a small pie, a wedge of cheese, these were eaten without ceremony. Hands were wiped on cloth, crumbs brushed away, and work resumed. As the day moved forward, hunger returned slowly, and the same foods were eaten again. The repetition was comforting. The predictability allowed the mind to remain calm. There was no anticipation of flavor, no craving, only routine. This quiet relationship with food shaped medieval life and created a kind of early, understated junk food culture, one defined not by excess, but by simplicity. And so, in the medieval streets and fields, junk food existed not as temptation, but as habit, plain, filling, and easily forgotten. It served its purpose, and then disappeared from thought, leaving behind only a gentle sense of fullness and calm. As the medieval day unfolded, food remained a steady presence in the background, never demanding attention, never exciting the senses. Bakeries played a central role in this quiet rhythm. Almost every town had at least one communal oven, and the smell of baking bread drifted gently through narrow streets, familiar and unchanging. For many people, the bakery was not a place of indulgence, but a routine stop, as ordinary as drawing water or sweeping a floor. Bread, once baked, rarely stayed soft for long. Medieval loaves were dense and heavy, made to last rather than delight. As hours passed, the crust hardened, and by the next day, the bread required effort to eat. This aging bread became one of the most common forms of casual eating, something to be picked up, broken apart, and slowly consumed between tasks. In this way, leftovers formed the foundation of medieval junk food, food eaten not at a table, not as a meal, but simply because it was there. Bakers often sold yesterday's bread at a lower price. These loaves were practical purchases for workers and travelers who needed something filling and cheap. There was no shame in buying old bread. In fact, it was expected. People knew its texture and taste well. It was dry, bland, and steady, requiring patience with each bite. Eating it forced the body to slow down, to chew carefully, to pause. Sometimes, old bread was softened intentionally. It might be dipped briefly into water, broth, or thin ale. This simple act transformed it just enough to make it manageable. The flavor did not change much, but the texture became gentler. These soaked pieces were eaten quietly, often standing, sometimes while leaning against a wall or sitting on a low step. There was no sense of a break or a snack. Eating blended seamlessly into the flow of the day. In larger towns, bakeries produced small items alongside bread, flat buns, rough rolls, and thin wafers made from simple dough were sold cheaply. These items could be eaten quickly or saved for later. Their taste was mild, almost forgettable. They were filling without being memorable. A person might eat one and barely notice, only realizing later that hunger had passed. Leftovers from households also contributed to this quiet food culture. Bits of porridge, cold beans, or thick vegetable stews were often eaten long after they were cooked. These foods were dense and slow to digest, making them ideal for sustaining energy throughout the day. When eaten outside regular mealtimes, they functioned much like modern snacks, though without excitement, without variety. In some homes, children were given small portions of leftover food to keep them quiet while adults worked. A piece of bread crust or a spoonful of cold porridge could occupy a child for a long time. Eating was slow and deliberate. There were no bright flavors to rush through, no sugar to encourage overeating. Food did its job and then faded into the background. Markets also offered opportunities for quiet, casual eating. Vendors sold roasted grains or nuts, prepared simply and eaten by the handful. These foods were dry and plain, requiring careful chewing. A person might buy a small portion and carry it in a pouch, eating a few pieces at a time while walking. There was no urgency. The act of eating stretched over hours. What stands out in these moments is how little attention food demanded. There were no choices to make, no preferences to consider. People ate what was available, what was familiar, what was affordable. The sameness of these foods created comfort. There was no disappointment because there were no expectations. The physical environment shaped this behavior as well. Without benches, tables, or designated eating spaces, people ate wherever they happened to be. Food was portable, sturdy, and quiet. Crumbs fell onto stone streets or dirt paths and were brushed away without thought. Hands were wiped on clothing. Life continued. Even the sounds of eating were subdued. Hard bread did not crunch sharply. It softened slowly in the mouth. Stews and porridges made little noise. Drinking ale was gentle and unremarkable. These sounds blended with the everyday background of footsteps, distant voices, and the occasional bell. In this way, medieval junk food was not about pleasure, but about rhythm. Eating marked time without interrupting it. It offered brief pauses without stopping the day entirely. Hunger arrived slowly, was answered quietly, and then faded again. There was also an acceptance of hunger itself. People expected it. They did not rush to satisfy it at the first sign. A small piece of bread was enough to hold it at bay. This restraint was not intentional. It was simply how life worked. Food was precious, and excess was unnecessary. As evening approached, these small eating moments accumulated. A person might not remember each bite, but together they formed a steady foundation. Energy was maintained, work was completed, and the body moved forward without complaint. In this calm, repetitive cycle, bakeries, leftovers, and simple market foods shaped a kind of medieval junk food culture that was deeply boring, deeply practical, and perfectly suited to a slow, quiet life. There was no temptation to overeat, no craving for more. Food existed, was eaten, and then was forgotten. And so the medieval day continued, guided by routine, sustained by plain food, and softened by the quiet reassurance that hunger would always be answered slowly, simply, and without excitement. In medieval towns, the market was not a place of excitement in the modern sense. It was a steady, predictable gathering where the same stalls appeared in the same spots, day after day. People walked familiar paths, exchanged few words, and bought what they needed without hesitation. Within this quiet setting, small amounts of food were sold for immediate eating, forming another layer of what we might gently call medieval junk food. Street sellers offered foods that could be eaten while standing or walking slowly. These foods were chosen not for taste, but for convenience and price. A laborer passing through the market might buy a small portion of roasted beans or peas, lightly salted and kept warm in a simple pot. The beans were dry on the outside and soft within, requiring careful chewing. They were eaten one by one, often without stopping. Another common market food was the small hand pie. These pies were roughly shaped, sealed with thick dough, and filled with whatever ingredients were available. Vegetables, grains, or small amounts of meat were chopped finely and packed tightly inside. The crust was heavy and plain, meant to hold its shape rather than please the palate. Eating one was slow work. Each bite required effort, and the filling offered little surprise. Fish, especially in towns near rivers or coasts, also appeared in simple, snack-like forms. Small fish were salted, dried, or lightly smoked, then sold in bundles. These were not eaten all at once. A person might tear off a small piece and chew it thoughtfully, saving the rest for later. The saltiness encouraged drinking, often of weak ale or water, stretching the eating experience over time. Fruit, when available, was another quiet food. Apples, pears, and plums were eaten slowly, often while resting on a bench or low wall. These fruits were not particularly sweet by modern standards. Their flavors were mild and sometimes sour. Eating fruit was a gentle interruption in the day, offering moisture and texture rather than pleasure. Market snacks were rarely eaten with urgency. People did not hurry through their food. There was no reason to. Time moved at a different pace, marked by the sun's position rather than by clocks. Eating fit into this rhythm naturally, without drawing attention to itself. Children often lingered near market stalls, hoping for small scraps or cheap treats. A vendor might give them a burnt crust, a misshapen bun, or a handful of grains. These offerings were modest and practical. Children sat on the ground or leaned against posts, eating quietly, absorbed in the simple task of chewing. There was little variation in these foods from day to day. The same snacks appeared again and again, reinforcing a sense of routine. People did not seek novelty. They sought familiarity. Knowing what a food would taste like brought comfort. It allowed the mind to relax. The sounds of the market were constant but subdued. Voices murmured, animals shifted, baskets were set down and lifted again. Eating blended into this soundscape. There was no crackle of wrappers, no clatter of utensils. Food was held in hands, wrapped in cloth, and eaten slowly. For travelers, market snacks were especially important. They provided energy without requiring a long stop. A traveler might buy a small pie or piece of cheese and continue walking, taking bites as the road unfolded ahead. Eating became part of movement, not a pause from it in this way. Medieval market food served the same role that modern junk food does: quick, accessible nourishment. Yet it lacked the intensity and stimulation we associate with such food today. There were no strong flavors to remember, no textures to crave. Once eaten, the food faded from memory. As the market day wore on, vendors sold what remained. Late in the afternoon, foods were cooler, drier, and even less appealing. Still, they were eaten. Hunger did not demand perfection. It asked only for enough by the time the market began to empty. Many people had eaten several small portions throughout the day. These meals did not stand out individually. Together, they formed a quiet pattern of nourishment that supported work and movement without distraction. This calm, repetitive experience of eating in the market reflects a broader truth about medieval junk food. It was not designed to be enjoyed. It was designed to exist. It filled space, filled time, and filled the stomach, all without asking for attention. And as people drifted away from the stalls and back into their daily routines, the memory of what they had eaten slipped away, leaving behind only a faint sense of fullness and the steady continuation of the day. Although most medieval days passed in quiet repetition, there were occasional moments when routine shifted slightly. These moments arrived during fairs, religious festivals, or seasonal gatherings. Even then, food did not become exciting in a modern sense. Instead, it became just a little different, offering mild variety without excess. These rare foods can be thought of as the closest medieval equivalent to indulgent junk food. Fairs were usually held on predictable dates, often once or twice a year. People knew when they were coming and planned accordingly. Vendors traveled from nearby towns, bringing foods that were not part of everyday diets. Still, these foods were made from the same basic ingredients: grain, fat, and salt. What changed was the method of preparation. Fried foods appeared more often at fairs. Small pieces of dough were dropped into hot fat and cooked until firm. They were not light or airy. They were dense, slightly greasy, and eaten warm. There were no sweet coatings or fillings. At most, a little honey might be drizzled over the surface. These foods were eaten slowly, often shared among family members to reduce cost. Another common fair food was roasted meat served in small portions. A strip of meat on a skewer could be bought and eaten while standing. The meat was usually tough, seasoned lightly with salt. It required careful chewing and took time to finish. Eating it was more about marking the occasion than about enjoyment. Sweet foods were still rare, even at festivals. Honey cakes, thick and heavy, were baked in advance and sold in small sizes. These cakes were filling and dry, designed to last. A person might take small bites over a long period, saving some for later. The sweetness was subtle and faded quickly. Children sometimes received small treats during festivals. Simple sugar candies made from boiled honey or syrup were occasionally available, but they were hard and slow to dissolve. Eating one could take several minutes, keeping the child occupied without encouraging excess. Despite the presence of these special foods, eating remained calm. People did not rush from stall to stall. They walked slowly, talked quietly, and ate deliberately. Food was still expensive, and waste was avoided. Every bite mattered. The environment of fairs was busy, but not overwhelming. Sounds were steady and continuous, blending into a low background hum. Eating fit naturally into this setting. A person might pause, take a few bites, then continue walking. There was no separation between eating and living. For many, these foods created mild memories simply because they were different. Yet even these memories were gentle. The flavors were not strong enough to linger. The experience passed as quietly as it arrived. In rural areas, seasonal celebrations brought similar foods. After harvests or during religious observances, households prepared slightly richer meals. A bit more fat, a bit more grain, perhaps a touch of sweetness. These foods were eaten slowly, often in silence, with gratitude rather than excitement. What is notable is how controlled these moments were. There was no binge eating, no loss of routine. Special foods did not replace ordinary ones. They briefly joined them. Once the fair ended or the festival passed, daily life returned to normal without resistance. This balance kept food from becoming a source of obsession. Even the most indulgent medieval snacks were restrained by necessity and habit. Eating remained functional, not emotional. As evening fell on these special days, people returned home, carrying small leftovers wrapped in cloth. These would be eaten later, becoming part of the same quiet routine as everyday food. The line between special and ordinary blurred quickly in this way. Medieval junk food at fairs and festivals offered only a soft variation on the familiar. It did not disrupt sleep or stir cravings. It simply marked time, reminding people that seasons changed and then returned again. And as the lights dimmed and the sounds faded, the memory of these foods settled into the background, leaving behind the same calm fullness that defined medieval eating throughout the year. As daylight faded in the medieval world, eating slowed along with everything else. There were no bright lights to extend the evening, no shops open late into the night. When the sun lowered and shadows lengthened, people naturally returned home, carrying with them the remains of the day tools, baskets, and sometimes a small amount of food saved for later. This late-day eating formed the final, quiet chapter of medieval junk food habits. Evening food was rarely a full meal for everyone. For many working people, the main meal had already been eaten earlier in the day. What remained was a light eating period meant only to ease hunger before sleep. Bread once again took center stage. A piece of leftover loaf, now firm and dry, was broken apart and eaten slowly. There was no rush to finish it. Hunger at this hour was gentle, not demanding. In some homes, thin soups or broths were reheated. These broths were simple, often made from water, herbs, and traces of vegetables or bones. When eaten in small amounts, they functioned like a snack rather than a meal. A person might sip quietly from a bowl, feeling warmth rather than flavor. The broth softened the stomach and prepared the body for rest. Cheese appeared again in the evening, cut into small pieces and shared. Its heaviness made it suitable for ending the day. Eating cheese required time and patience, encouraging a slower pace. There was no desire for more once it was finished. Families often ate together in near silence during this time. Conversation was minimal, voices low. The day's work had drained energy, and food was approached without interest. Children chewed slowly, adults rested between bites, and the fire crackled gently in the background. For those living alone or traveling, evening food was even simpler. A piece of bread dipped in ale or water might be all that was eaten. This combination filled the stomach just enough to allow sleep. There was no expectation of satisfaction, only adequacy. The act of eating at night was closely tied to routine. It signaled the end of labor and the approach of rest. There was comfort in this repetition. The same foods, eaten in the same way, at the same time, day after day. Importantly, there was little temptation to eat beyond need. Food was stored carefully, and tomorrow's meals mattered. Excess eating served no purpose. This restraint made evening snacks small and unremarkable. As darkness settled fully, people prepared for sleep. Eating had done its job. Hunger was quieted, not eliminated. This slight hunger was familiar and acceptable. It did not disturb rest. In this final stage of the day, medieval junk food revealed its true nature. It was not indulgent, not exciting, and not memorable. It was simply there, supporting the body as it moved toward sleep. The mind, free from stimulation, could rest easily. The sameness of food contributed to this calm. There were no strong tastes to linger, no cravings to consider. And so the medieval day ended as it had begun, with simple food, eaten quietly, without thought. Bread, broth, and cheese faded into the background as sleep arrived. This gentle closing rhythm completed the cycle of medieval eating, preparing the way for another day just like it. In the medieval world, drinking was as much a part of daily life as eating, though it was rarely exciting. Water was not always safe to drink, so beverages formed a quiet background to both work and rest. Among these, ale and weak beer were the most common. They were simple, familiar, and taken slowly throughout the day. For most people, drinking was not about pleasure. It was about sustaining energy, quenching thirst, and softening dry food. Ale was made from grains, such as barley or oats, and fermented lightly. The alcohol content was low, often comparable to modern non-alcoholic beer. This meant it could be consumed throughout the day without causing inebriation. Laborers, apprentices, and even children might sip ale quietly while performing their daily tasks. The flavor was plain, slightly bitter, and constant, never surprising. Drinking it required patience and did not interrupt the rhythm of life in homes. Ale was poured into wooden cups or simple pottery bowls. There was no foam, no flourish, no sparkling bubbles. The drink was steady and reliable. When eaten with dry bread or small pastries, it softened the food and made chewing easier. Each sip moved slowly down the throat, blending with the quiet sounds of a home, the occasional creak of floorboards, the faint rustle of cloth, or the soft crackle of a fire. Water was used when available, often drawn from wells or streams. Its taste depended on location, sometimes carrying hints of minerals, sometimes almost flavorless. Like ale, it was consumed without urgency. Drinking water was an unremarkable act, done out of necessity rather than desire. People did not seek enjoyment in it. They simply drank to sustain the body. Other beverages were occasional, less common, and often associated with wealth or special occasions. Wine, for example, was consumed mostly by the upper classes. Even then, it was not drunk for pleasure, but as part of a meal or a ceremonial occasion. Spiced drinks, herbal infusions, and broths served occasionally, providing mild variation but never disrupting the calm monotony of daily life. Drinking, like eating, followed a rhythm. Morning sips of ale, softened dry bread. Midday drinks supported energy during labor. Evening drinks settled the stomach, easing the transition toward rest. There was no excess, no rush, no excitement. Each sip was deliberate, measured, and familiar. For children, ale and weak beer were not harmful. They consumed small amounts alongside meals, slowly and without complaint. The beverage filled the stomach and softened coarse foods. It was quietly effective, not stimulating or entertaining, in towns and marketplaces. Vendors sometimes sold small cups of ale or thin broths. Workers might pause briefly, sip slowly, then continue their tasks. The drink was practical. It did not call attention, nor did it create longing. It existed as a companion to the day, always steady and unobtrusive in this way. Medieval drinking habits mirrored the simplicity of eating habits. Beverages were functional, predictable, and soothing in their consistency. They supported life without drawing thought or desire. One could drink and then forget the act entirely, recalling only a sense of mild fullness or comfort. The calm, repetitive presence of drink contributed to the overall rhythm of medieval life. Hunger and thirst arrived gently, were answered quietly, and then receded. Food and drink were companions, not distractions. They marked the passage of time rather than celebrating it. And as the day moved forward, people returned to their tasks, their meals and drinks, forgotten except as part of the steady, unremarkable flow of life. In many medieval homes, people prepared small, simple drinks from herbs or plants growing nearby. These were not brewed to delight the senses, but to support the body quietly. A handful of chamomile, mint, or sage might be steeped in water and served warm. These beverages were mild, bland, and comforting. Drinking them required patience, often taken slowly from a wooden or earthen cup while sitting by the fire. Herbal drinks were rarely sweetened. Honey, when used, appeared sparingly and only for special occasions. The taste was muted, designed to be functional rather than memorable. These drinks were sipped throughout the day, particularly in the late afternoon or evening, as a way to relax the stomach and prepare the body for rest. The warmth of the liquid, combined with the mild flavors of the herbs, created a soothing effect without stimulating the mind. In the kitchens of towns and villages, water was often boiled before consumption. This was a simple precaution, not a luxury. Boiling reduced impurities and ensured safety, but did not change the taste substantially. Children might drink these simple, warm waters along with bread or porridge, quietly chewing and sipping as they listened to the faint sounds of daily life. The crackling hearth, the distant footsteps in the street, the soft clatter of dishes. Broths and thin soups were another common evening drink, made from vegetables, grains, or bits of leftover meat. These liquids were simple and thick enough to provide nourishment while remaining easy to swallow. They were rarely seasoned beyond salt or a few dried herbs. Eating and drinking merged during these times. A spoonful of broth softened leftover bread or cheese, forming a small, slow meal. The act of eating and drinking was deliberate, unhurried, and consistent, forming part of the unchanging rhythm of the day. Evening drinks were often taken in quiet company. Families might sit together, sipping from their bowls or cups while the day's tasks drew to a close. There was little conversation, and the sounds of drinking blended naturally with the ambient creaks and groans of the home. The pace was calm, and each sip contributed to a sense of continuity and routine. In towns, simple drinks were sometimes sold on the street. Vendors carried small jugs of weak ale, thin herbal broths, or water. People bought these modest servings, consumed them slowly while walking, and then continued with their errands. The drinks provided hydration and mild energy without drawing attention or excitement. They were practical, functional, and quietly effective. Children learned these habits early. From a young age, they drank slowly, accepted mild flavors, and became accustomed to the rhythm of simple daily consumption. There was no hurry, no distraction, no craving. Each sip, each small cup of liquid, reinforced patience, endurance, and a calm approach to sustenance. By the late evening, most people had consumed a series of small drinks throughout the day, unnoticed and unremembered individually. Together, they maintained the body, supported labor, and eased the transition into night. The beverages of the medieval household ale, herbal teas, broth, or water were unremarkable in taste, unexciting in appearance, and yet central to life. In this gentle, repetitive way, the culture of medieval drinking mirrored that of eating. Food and drink were companions to work and rest, moving quietly through the hours. They were functional, simple, and slow, designed to satisfy basic needs without entertaining the senses. In this consistency, life found stability, and the rhythm of the day continued smoothly, like the quiet flow of a shallow stream. The calm, low-key presence of these drinks, much like the bland and practical foods of the day, contributed to the overall sense of slow, boring comfort that defined medieval routines. They supported sleep rather than disturbed it, filling the stomach and softening the mind without fanfare. In medieval towns, alehouses and small taverns provided places to drink away from the home, though they were far from lively or noisy by modern standards. These establishments were practical, functional, and understated. People visited them to consume simple ale, rest briefly, and then return to their daily routines. Drinking was never rushed, and the atmosphere encouraged calm, slow consumption rather than excitement or social spectacle. Alehouses were usually small, wooden buildings with rough tables and benches. The interior was dimly lit by small windows and occasional candles, creating a subdued, steady environment. Patrons, mostly laborers and tradespeople, sat quietly, sipping from wooden cups. Conversations were low and brief, often limited to greetings or brief comments about work. The focus remained on drinking slowly, maintaining hydration and energy for the tasks that awaited. Ale served in these places was similar to what people drank at home, lightly fermented and low in alcohol. Its purpose was practical: to fill the stomach, ease digestion of dry bread or cheese, and provide a small amount of nourishment. There were no fancy flavors, no frothy additions, no celebratory decorations. The drink existed to support life, quietly and predictably. Simple foods were sometimes consumed alongside the ale. Small pies, cold cheese, or leftover bread might accompany a cup of drink, eaten slowly and deliberately. The portions were small, the flavors muted. Eating and drinking merged into a continuous, calm rhythm, allowing patrons to pause briefly before returning to work or home life. There was no indulgence, no rush, no distraction. In rural towns or villages, taverns were even more subdued. Patrons were often regulars, known to each other by sight rather than name. Ale was poured carefully, cups were reused and washed simply, and the environment remained steady. The pace of drinking mirrored the rhythm of the surrounding streets and fields, slow, repetitive, and unchanging. Even children might occasionally be present in these small establishments during the day. They sipped weak ale, ate small pieces of bread, and quietly observed adults. This practice was practical, not social. Children learned early that drinking was calm, necessary, and unremarkable. It was a part of life, not a form of entertainment or indulgence. The quiet environment of the alehouse reflected broader societal habits. Drinking was integrated into daily routines, timed around work and chores, rather than social events or celebrations. Patrons did not linger excessively, and there was no expectation of excitement. The act of drinking was deliberate, unhurried, and functional. The sounds of these spaces were muted. Soft footsteps, the clink of wooden cups, and occasional low voices formed a constant, unobtrusive background. Drinking did not interrupt the rhythm of life. It blended seamlessly with it. Patrons sipped slowly, chewed plain foods, and then returned to their tasks with calm energy. At the end of the day, alehouses emptied quietly. Patrons returned home, carrying any remaining drinks or food. Nothing was wasted. What was consumed had served its purpose. The experience was remembered only as part of the ongoing cycle of daily life, necessary, functional, and gently repetitive. In this way, alehouses and small taverns contributed to a subtle medieval culture of drinking. Beverages were simple, portions were modest, and the pace was slow. Life moved steadily, uninterrupted by indulgence or excess. Drinking, like eating, was a companion to daily routine rather than an event to be savored or remembered. This calm, predictable presence of ale and simple drinks supported both body and mind, creating a natural bridge to evening rest. Hunger and thirst were quietly addressed, and the rhythm of the day continued undisturbed. In medieval life, most drinking was plain, quiet, and routine, but the changing seasons brought subtle variations. Seasonal drinks appeared occasionally, often associated with harvests, religious festivals, or communal celebrations. Even then, these beverages were simple and mild, offering only a faint shift from the daily monotony of ale. Water and herbal teas during the autumn harvest. Grain-based drinks were sometimes prepared with small additions. A few herbs or dried fruits might be mixed in, creating a slightly different aroma and taste. These drinks were never sweet in a modern sense, and the flavors were subtle enough to remain calm and unobtrusive. They were sipped slowly, often while sitting in the warm kitchen or resting after a day's labor. Festivals introduced rare beverages, sometimes infused with honey or light spices. These drinks were served in small portions and consumed deliberately. They were intended to mark the occasion, but without excess or indulgence. People did not drink quickly or in large amounts. Each sip was slow, deliberate, and unremarkable. Blending naturally into the rhythm of the day, children might receive a taste of these slightly sweeter drinks during special times. A small cup of honeyed water or weak spiced ale could be given, but never in quantity. The purpose was functional, to offer mild nourishment and a sense of routine variation. The flavors were soft, fleeting, and quickly forgotten. Even at larger gatherings, drinks remained restrained. Large casks of ale or wine were present, but consumption was measured. People moved slowly through the crowd, taking small sips while talking in low voices or observing others quietly. There was no revelry or loud celebration. The environment was subdued, familiar, and calming. The preparation of seasonal drinks often required patience. Herbs and grains were soaked, boiled, and strained. Honey was added sparingly. The process itself was slow, methodical, and unhurried. The resulting beverages reflected this pace, simple, mild, and functional. There were no vibrant colors or frothy decorations. Each drink was modest, serving a practical purpose rather than seeking to entertain the senses. Evening and nighttime drinks maintained the same quiet rhythm. Small cups of warm herbal water or thin ale were consumed before bed, soothing the stomach and preparing the body for rest. The slight variations in taste provided a gentle sense of novelty, but they did not disrupt the calm flow of life. Drinking remained an act of routine, repetition, and subtle comfort. The muted sounds of preparation and consumption, water pouring, cups clinking softly, quiet conversation formed part of the background of daily life. Drinking did not interrupt work or rest. It moved with them, supporting the body steadily. Through all of this, medieval drinking culture emphasized continuity over pleasure. Beverages were consistent, portions were modest, and flavors were gentle. Even the rare variations were designed to be calm and functional, rather than exciting or memorable. In this way, the pattern of everyday drinking, complemented by seasonal and festival variations, created a slow, unremarkable, and soothing routine. Hunger and thirst were quietly addressed, and the body and mind were gently prepared for rest. Life continued in its steady rhythm, uninterrupted, calm, and unhurried. As darkness settled over towns and villages, the final drinks of the day were taken quietly, marking the transition from labor and activity to rest. Medieval people approached these evening beverages without excitement or ceremony. The purpose was simple: to soothe the stomach, ease the body, and support the coming hours of sleep. Warm ale, thin broth, or herbal tea was common. Each drink was taken slowly, often from a small wooden cup or clay bowl. The flavors were mild, muted, and calming. Drinking was not about pleasure or taste. It was about practicality. A sip softened dry bread, warmed the stomach, or provided a mild sense of fullness. This quiet act mirrored the simplicity of daily food routines. In households, families might gather briefly for these last sips. Conversations were minimal. Children drank carefully. Adults sipped slowly, and the room was filled with a soft rhythm of quiet consumption. The flickering light from a small hearth or candle added to the gentle, sleepy atmosphere. There was no rush, no noise, and no excitement, only the steady, calm conclusion of the day. For travelers or those living alone, nighttime drinks were even simpler. A single cup of thin ale or water, perhaps accompanied by a small piece of bread, marked the end of the day. Drinking was deliberate and slow. Once consumed, the beverage faded from memory, leaving only a mild sense of comfort and readiness for sleep. The environment complemented this calm routine. Sounds were minimal. The occasional creak of floorboards, the distant barking of a dog, or the soft rustle of cloth as people settled for the night. Drinking did not interrupt these sounds. It blended with them, forming part of the quiet landscape of evening life. Even the preparation of these final drinks followed a slow, steady rhythm. Water was warmed, herbs were steeped, or ale was poured carefully from a jug. Nothing was hurried. The act of drinking was intertwined with the natural pace of evening, supporting the body and mind as they transitioned toward rest. The pattern of nighttime consumption was predictable and comforting. Hunger and thirst had been addressed throughout the day with steady, unremarkable foods and beverages. Now, the final sip served as a gentle conclusion. It reinforced the calm cycle of daily life and prepared the body for sleep without creating stimulation or desire. By the time cups were emptied and dishes set aside, people were ready to rest. Food and drink, quiet and unobtrusive, had fulfilled their purpose. The mind could relax, the body could slow, and the night could be embraced without distraction. In this gentle, repetitive routine, medieval drinking, like eating, was never about indulgence. It existed to support life quietly, predictably, and calmly. Each sip, each swallow, contributed to the rhythm of the day, preparing the way for peaceful rest. The cycle of medieval beverages came to a close, leaving behind only a sense of satisfaction, calm, and the gentle approach of sleep. Even in the medieval world, people occasionally enjoyed small, quiet treats. Unlike the vivid, sugary snacks of modern times, medieval sweets were rare, plain, and functional. They were eaten slowly, without excitement, and often as part of daily life rather than for pleasure alone. These simple treats included dried fruits, small honey cakes, and occasionally boiled sweets made from sugar or syrup. Though sugar itself was expensive and uncommon, dried fruits such as raisins, figs, or plums were sometimes given to children or used sparingly in households. Their flavors were soft, muted, and slightly sweet, offering a gentle variation to the monotony of daily bread and cheese. Eating them required slow chewing, as the texture was often dense and chewy. A few pieces might be taken throughout the day, bridging meals without disturbing the calm rhythm of life. Honey cakes, small and thick, appeared on special occasions or in homes where honey was affordable. They were rarely soft or light. Instead, they were dense and slightly dry, providing sustenance as much as sweetness. A person would break off a small piece, chew slowly, and feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. The sweetness faded quickly, leaving only the familiar taste of grain and honey. These cakes were functional, marking a moment of variety rather than indulgence. Boiled sweets, when available, were even more restrained, made by heating sugar or honey with water until thick, then cooled into small shapes. These treats were hard and slow to dissolve. Children and adults alike consumed them gradually, enjoying the mild sensation of sweetness without craving more. Their rarity meant that they were appreciated in the calmest sense, rather than eaten in excess or with excitement. Even in towns and marketplaces, small sweet snacks were modest. Vendors sold dried fruits or simple cakes in plain packaging, often wrapped in cloth. People purchased them for nourishment and carried them slowly through the streets, eating piece by piece as they continued their daily tasks. There was no rush, no craving, and no spectacle, only the quiet passage of time. punctuated by small, functional bites. In households, sweets were often combined with other foods to extend their sustenance. A piece of honey cake might be softened in warm water or weak ale, making it easier to eat and blending its flavor with that of everyday staples. This method emphasized utility over enjoyment, turning treats into practical additions to the diet. Children experienced these sweets as gentle rewards. They were given small portions, often after completing chores or helping with household work. The act of eating was slow and deliberate, teaching patience and restraint. The sweetness was temporary and faded quickly, reinforcing the notion that food existed primarily to support life rather than entertain the senses. Throughout the day, the availability of sweets was limited. People did not expect them daily. Instead, they appeared intermittently, providing mild variation without interrupting the rhythm of meals and drinks. This scarcity ensured that treats remained calm, functional, and unmemorable, a subtle addition to the background of life. In this way, medieval sweets and dried fruits became part of a quiet culture of eating, gently supplementing the basic diet of bread, cheese, and ale. They were never the focus of attention, never designed to excite, and rarely remembered in detail. Their role was simple: to support, to sustain, and to gently mark the passage of time. Evening or late-day consumption of these small treats reinforced calm routines. A few pieces of dried fruit or a small slice of honey cake could be taken alongside weak ale or water, quietly filling the stomach and soothing the body. Eating and drinking merged seamlessly, maintaining the slow, predictable rhythm of the medieval day. In medieval life, people often ate small, simple snacks between meals, though these were rarely exciting or elaborate. Nuts and seeds formed a quiet, practical part of the diet. They were easy to store, carried well, and provided steady energy. These foods were never consumed in large amounts or with indulgence. They were functional, filling, and quietly familiar. Hazelnuts, walnuts, and almonds were common in regions where they grew. People ate them raw or lightly roasted. Eating nuts required patience. The shells had to be broken carefully, and the kernels chewed slowly. Their flavor was mild, earthy, and steady, never overwhelming. A small handful consumed throughout the day could sustain a laborer or traveler without disturbing the calm rhythm of daily life. Seeds such as pumpkin, sunflower, or flax were sometimes eaten, though less frequently. They were typically sprinkled on bread, mixed into porridge, or eaten plain in small quantities. Like nuts, seeds were dry, bland, and filling. They required slow chewing and were often consumed quietly, alone or in small groups. Eating them was practical rather than enjoyable. In towns, market vendors occasionally sold small portions of nuts and seeds for immediate consumption. People walked slowly, taking a few pieces at a time, pausing briefly before continuing their errands. These snacks were functional, filling minor hunger without creating excitement. There was no sugarcoating or seasoning, beyond perhaps a touch of salt. Children were introduced to these simple snacks early in life. A handful of nuts or seeds occupied their attention for several minutes, teaching patience and restraint. They were rarely consumed quickly, and the flavor was gentle enough not to create longing or distraction. Children learned to associate these foods with calm, steady eating rather than indulgence. Within households, Nuts and seeds were often stored for months, providing a quiet, reliable source of energy during periods of scarcity or winter months. They were eaten sparingly, ensuring that each small portion lasted. This slow, measured consumption reinforced the steady rhythm of life, where nothing was wasted and sustenance was deliberate. Eating these small snacks required minimal preparation. Nuts might be lightly roasted over a small fire, and seeds could be toasted or ground into flour. Even minimal cooking added warmth and texture without introducing strong flavors or excitement. The act of preparing and eating them was slow, methodical, and calming. Throughout the day, nuts and seeds appeared alongside other quiet foods. A piece of bread might accompany them, or a small sip of weak ale or water. Eating became an ongoing, gentle routine rather than an event. Snacks were spaced out, each one a minor pause, marking time without drawing attention. By evening, the body had consumed a series of small, bland foods and drinks. Nuts and seeds contributed to the calm fullness that defined the medieval day. They were functional, predictable, and unremarkable, supporting life quietly and consistently. In this way, medieval snacking through nuts, seeds, and other small foods formed a slow, repetitive pattern. Hunger was addressed, energy maintained, and the rhythm of life continued without excitement, pleasure, or distraction. Food existed as a quiet companion, ensuring survival and calm continuity, quietly preparing the body for sleep. In medieval life, cheese and other dairy products played an important role as quiet, practical snacks. Cheese was often simple, hard, and slightly dry, designed to last rather than to delight the senses. People ate it slowly, in small pieces, often alongside bread or a sip of ale. These snacks were functional, filling, and familiar, forming part of the gentle rhythm of the day. Hard cheeses, such as those made from cows, goats, or sheep's milk, were common. They were dense and required careful chewing. The flavors were mild and steady, rarely strong or sharp. A small piece, eaten over time, satisfied hunger without creating excitement. It was a quiet, consistent addition to the diet, valued for practicality rather than indulgence. Soft cheeses existed as well, but were less common due to storage difficulties. When eaten, they were consumed slowly, often spread on bread or mixed with small amounts of herbs. The taste remained muted, comforting in its familiarity, and never overwhelming. Eating was calm, deliberate, and quiet. A splash of milk or cream might be added to soften texture and provide mild nourishment. This act was simple and functional. Each bite became part of a steady routine, supporting energy and fullness without drawing attention. There was no urgency, no craving, only slow, purposeful consumption. In markets and villages, vendors sometimes sold cheese in small portions for immediate eating. People purchased pieces wrapped in cloth, carrying them slowly while continuing daily tasks. Eating was measured and unhurried, fitting naturally into the rhythm of walking, working, or resting. Children learned early to eat cheese patiently. A small piece could occupy them for minutes, requiring slow chewing. Its mild flavor was gentle on the palate, teaching patience and restraint. Cheese, like other snacks, was functional. It nourished without stimulating excess appetite or desire. Within households, cheese was stored carefully, often in cellars or cool rooms. ensuring that portions lasted for days or weeks. Eating a small piece at various points during the day became a quiet, predictable ritual. It supported the body steadily, reinforcing a calm rhythm of sustenance. The sounds of cheese being eaten were minimal. No crunch, no dripping, only soft chewing and occasional swallowing. These quiet noises blended with the ambient sounds of medieval life. Fire crackling, floorboards shifting, distant voices, or animals moving outside. Eating did not interrupt the day. It flowed with it. Evening consumption of cheese and dairy snacks complemented other late-day foods. A few slices accompanied bread or a sip of ale, soothing the stomach and preparing the body for rest. By the end of the day, these snacks contributed to a steady sense of fullness, calm, and readiness for sleep. In this way, cheese and other dairy snacks reflected the broader medieval approach to food: simple, practical, repetitive, and unexciting. They existed to support life quietly, forming part of the unchanging, soothing rhythm that guided daily routines. Grains were the backbone of the medieval diet, and porridge or simple grain-based snacks were common throughout the day. These foods were filling, plain, and unremarkable, designed to sustain the body quietly rather than excite the palate. Oats, barley, rye, and wheat were ground into coarse flour or boiled whole, forming soft, dense porridges eaten slowly with small pieces of bread or cheese. Porridge was often thick and pasty, with little added flavor. Salt or a few dried herbs might be mixed in, but sweetness was rare. Eating porridge required careful chewing and slow swallowing. It was practical and satisfying, providing steady energy without distraction. Laborers, travelers, and children all consumed it with the same calm patience, taking small spoonfuls and moving on with their day. Grain snacks were also portable. Small, flat cakes or dried bread made from leftover dough could be carried to work in the fields or town streets. These pieces were hard. Sometimes they were softened with water, ale, or milk. Each bite was slow and functional, sustaining the body through long hours of labor. There was no excitement in eating them, only the quiet satisfaction of necessity in markets. Small cakes or grain-based snacks were sold for immediate consumption. People might walk slowly while nibbling, blending the act of eating into the rhythm of daily movement. The taste was mild, textures were consistent, and portions were small. Snacking became part of the day's pace rather than a highlight. Children were taught to eat porridge and grain snacks with patience. A small bowl might occupy them for several minutes, teaching careful chewing and self-control. The bland flavors reinforced the idea that food existed to support life rather than entertain. Even the occasional addition of a dried fruit or a small drizzle of honey was subtle and fleeting, never creating intense desire. Grains were also incorporated into soups and stews. Small amounts of barley or oats thickened liquids and added nourishment. These meals could be eaten quietly at mid-morning or mid-afternoon, sustaining workers without interrupting their routine. The combination of textures and mild flavors kept the diet steady, predictable, and calming. The sounds of eating grains were soft and subdued. There was no crunch, no splashing, only gentle chewing and swallowing. These quiet noises blended seamlessly with the everyday sounds of a medieval town or home, distant voices, animals moving, and fires crackling in hearths. Eating became an integrated part of life, unnoticed but essential. Evening consumption of grain-based foods continued the gentle rhythm. Leftover porridge, small flat cakes, or softened bread might be eaten alongside weak ale or water. These foods reinforced calm fullness, signaling the transition toward rest and sleep. They completed the daily pattern of quiet, functional eating in this way. Grain-based snacks and porridge exemplified the medieval approach to food: simple, repetitive, practical, and quietly nourishing. They sustained the body and mind, supporting life without distraction, indulgence, or excitement. As night approached, medieval people often had small, quiet snacks to conclude the day. These were rarely elaborate, usually consisting of leftovers from earlier meals. Small pieces of bread, a few nuts, dried fruits, or slices of cheese. Evening snacks were practical, eaten slowly, and intended to calm the stomach before sleep rather than provide pleasure. Leftover bread was common. It might be slightly hardened from sitting out, but this did not diminish its purpose. People broke off small pieces, sometimes dipping them in water, ale, or a thin broth. Chewing was deliberate, swallowing slow, allowing the body to feel nourished without excitement. Even the texture, slightly dry and firm, contributed to the steady, unremarkable rhythm of eating. Cheese and small bits of dried fruit were eaten alongside bread, offering a mild variation in flavor and texture. Honey, if available, could be drizzled on a piece of bread or cake, but sparingly. The sweetness was subtle, fleeting, and quickly forgotten, reinforcing the idea that food existed for sustenance rather than indulgence. Evening snacks were often consumed quietly, alone, or in small family groups. Conversations were minimal. The act of eating merged naturally with other household sounds: the crackle of firewood, faint movement, and the distant noise of animals settling for the night. The calm environment encouraged slow eating and gentle focus on the simple act of nourishment. Travelers, or laborers, returning home at night would eat similarly modest portions: a small loaf of bread or a piece of cheese. No special preparation was necessary, and no hurry was involved. Eating was deliberate, slow, and unobtrusive. The quiet, repetitive nature of these evening snacks mirrored broader medieval eating habits. Food was functional, predictable, and plain. It supported the body, provided necessary nutrients, and prepared the mind for sleep. There was no rush, no excitement, and no distraction from the daily rhythm. Evening snacks often marked the final act of the day's consumption. Once eaten, dishes were set aside, fires dimmed, and the household prepared for night. The calm fullness left by these small, plain foods created a gentle sense of satisfaction, easing the body and mind into the natural pattern of rest. In this way, evening snacks reinforced the medieval philosophy of eating: slow, deliberate, practical, and calming. Food was a quiet companion to life's rhythm, sustaining energy and health while allowing the mind to relax. The unremarkable, repetitive nature of these snacks ensured that daily routines continued smoothly, supporting life without excitement or indulgence. Thus, the medieval day came to a close. The rhythm of eating, snacking, and drinking had guided the body through its tasks, and now a calm, quiet night awaited, ready for sleep. Although the concept of fast food, as we know it today, did not exist in medieval times, there were small, quick meals eaten between tasks. These meals were modest, practical, and entirely functional, designed to provide energy without distraction or excitement. Workers, travelers, and laborers often carried such foods in cloth wrappings or small baskets, consuming them slowly while resting for a few moments between chores. Bread was the most common component of these quick meals. Dense, coarse, and sometimes slightly stale, it was broken into small pieces and eaten slowly. People paired it with a bit of cheese, a handful of nuts, or occasionally dried fruit. Each bite required attention and chewing, reinforcing the calm, deliberate pace of life. These snacks were not about enjoyment. They were about sustaining strength. For those working in fields or workshops, a small piece of meat, salted and cured, could be included. The meat was tough, requiring slow chewing, and its flavor was mild and steady. It was functional, providing protein to sustain laborers through the afternoon, rather than indulgence or pleasure. Vegetables, when available, were sometimes eaten raw or boiled and carried alongside bread. They added moisture and mild flavor to the snack, but did not introduce excitement. The combination of bread, nuts, cheese, or vegetables formed a quiet, balanced intake of nourishment that kept energy steady and bodies moving. Travelers on long journeys relied heavily on these small, portable meals. A handful of dried fruit, a piece of bread, and a few nuts could last for hours, eaten slowly as they walked. The pace of consumption matched the pace of travel, unhurried, steady, and functional. There was no thought of indulgence, and no sense of novelty. The goal was energy and calm continuity. Even in towns, street vendors sold similar quick meals. Small pies, simple cakes, or dried foods were available for those who needed a brief pause. People ate slowly, often walking or sitting quietly nearby, blending consumption into their movement. The rhythm of eating became part of the rhythm of the day. Children were introduced to this practice early. Small snacks carried to the fields or workshops taught patience and methodical eating. Nibbling slowly on bread, nuts, or dried fruit reinforced self-control and familiarized them with the steady, functional approach to food. The sounds of these small, practical meals were minimal: soft chewing, gentle rustle of cloth, the occasional crack of bread breaking. Eating blended into ambient life, whether in a cottage, town, or field. There was no distraction or excitement, only quiet sustenance. By late afternoon, these small meals completed the necessary energy for the day. They maintained fullness, prepared the body for evening meals, and reinforced the slow, deliberate pattern of medieval life. Eating remained functional, repetitive, and boring in the most soothing sense. In medieval towns, markets provided an occasional opportunity for small, quick snacks. Unlike the crowded, colorful markets of today, these markets were subdued and functional. Vendors offered plain, practical foods, small pieces of bread, thin pies, or dried meats. These were eaten slowly and deliberately, blending seamlessly into the rhythm of daily life, rather than creating excitement or indulgence. People visiting markets did not rush from stall to stall. They moved quietly, observing the goods and occasionally purchasing a small item to nibble on while walking. A small pie, slightly dry and dense, might be broken into pieces and eaten over several minutes. The taste was mild and consistent, never overwhelming or memorable. Eating became part of the steady rhythm of moving through the market, providing energy and sustenance without distraction. Dried meat or fish was another common snack sold by vendors. Strips of salted meat were tough and required careful chewing. A person might carry a few pieces in a cloth wrap, taking small bites between errands or while walking home. The flavor was muted, salty, and functional, intended to fill the stomach and support ongoing work. There was no indulgence, and the food was never eaten for pleasure alone. Bread remained the staple for market snacks. Small, leftover pieces were sold cheaply or traded for other items. The bread might be slightly stale, but this did not affect its function. It was filling, easily carried, and consumed slowly. A few pieces consumed throughout the day provided a quiet, steady source of energy. Blending into the calm pattern of medieval eating, children might walk through the market with small snacks, such as nuts, dried fruits, or pieces of bread. Eating was slow and deliberate, reinforcing patience and self-control. The blandness of the food ensured that it did not excite the senses, keeping the focus on nourishment rather than enjoyment. Evening market snacks were similar. Vendors often sold small pieces of leftover food, providing a practical solution for those finishing daily errands. Eating was done quietly, standing or walking slowly, with minimal conversation. The foods supported energy and fullness, maintaining the steady rhythm of life as people returned home for the night. The sounds of eating in the market were subtle, soft chewing, the occasional rustle of cloth or baskets, and the muted background of vendors calling quietly. These noises blended with the ambient life of the town, creating a soothing, repetitive soundscape rather than distraction. Through these simple street snacks, medieval townspeople maintained calm, functional eating habits. Foods were practical, portions were small, and flavors were mild. Eating in the market reinforced the slow, deliberate rhythm of daily life, ensuring that sustenance was achieved without excitement or indulgence. At home, medieval people often had small, quiet meals between their main daily tasks. These were not elaborate or indulgent, but simple, functional, and sustaining. Bread, cheese, nuts, and occasionally dried fruits made up the bulk of these mini-meals. Their purpose was to maintain energy and calm hunger, supporting labor without excitement or distraction. A slice of bread, slightly firm or dry from sitting out, was broken into pieces and eaten slowly. Cheese, dense and mild, was paired with bread or eaten separately. Nuts and seeds provided steady energy. Sometimes a small bowl of porridge or gruel was warmed and consumed alongside, softening the texture of dry foods. Each bite was deliberate, slow, and quiet, blending naturally into the rhythm of the household. Households were calm during these mid-task meals. People might sit near a small fire, quietly chewing while listening to the faint ambient sounds, floorboards creaking, the occasional clatter of a dish, or animals moving outside. There was no conversation or laughter. Eating was functional, not social. Each small meal provided nourishment, maintaining energy for work that continued steadily through the day. Children participated in these quiet meals as well. A small piece of bread, a few nuts, or a bit of cheese taught patience and methodical eating. Flavors were mild and textures familiar, reinforcing the idea that food existed to sustain the body rather than entertain the senses. Snacks were consumed slowly, often over several minutes, allowing the mind to remain calm and focused. Even when leftovers were used for these small meals, preparation was minimal. Bread could be softened with water or weak ale, nuts cracked carefully, and cheese cut into small pieces. The act of preparing and eating was methodical, unhurried, and soothing. It became part of the natural rhythm of the day, quietly bridging main meals and tasks by late afternoon. These small meals completed the necessary intake of food for many households. Hunger was gently addressed, energy maintained, and the body prepared for the evening. Meals were functional, repetitive, and plain, creating a calm, predictable routine. The soundscape of these home meals was subtle. Soft chewing, gentle rustling of cloth, and muted clinking of dishes blended with ambient life. Eating did not disrupt work or rest. It moved with them, quietly supporting survival and calm. In this way, quiet meals between tasks exemplified the medieval approach to daily eating: simple, repetitive, functional, and soothing. Hunger was addressed, energy sustained, and life moved forward steadily, without excitement or indulgence. Food remained a quiet companion, blending with the rhythms of home, work, and rest. At home, medieval people often had small, quiet meals between their main daily tasks. These were not elaborate or indulgent, but simple, functional, and sustaining. Bread, cheese, nuts, and occasionally dried fruits made up the bulk of these mini-meals. Their purpose was to maintain energy and calm hunger, supporting labor without excitement or distraction. A slice of bread, slightly firm or dry from sitting out, was broken into pieces and eaten slowly. Cheese, dense and mild, was paired with bread or eaten separately. Nuts and seeds provided steady energy. Sometimes a small bowl of porridge or gruel was warmed and consumed alongside, softening the texture of dry foods. Each bite was deliberate, slow, and quiet, blending naturally into the rhythm of the household. Households were calm during these mid-task meals. People might sit near a small fire, quietly chewing while listening to the faint ambient sounds, floorboards creaking, the occasional clatter of a dish, or animals moving outside. There was no conversation or laughter. Eating was functional, not social. Each small meal provided nourishment, maintaining energy for work that continued steadily through the day. Children participated in these quiet meals as well. A small piece of bread, a few nuts, or a bit of cheese taught patience and methodical eating. Flavors were mild and textures familiar, reinforcing the idea that food existed to sustain the body rather than entertain the senses. Snacks were consumed slowly, often over several minutes, allowing the mind to remain calm and focused. Even when leftovers were used for these small meals, preparation was minimal. Bread could be softened with water or weak ale, nuts cracked carefully, and cheese cut into small pieces. The act of preparing and eating was methodical, unhurried, and soothing. It became part of the natural rhythm of the day, quietly bridging main meals and tasks by late afternoon. These small meals completed the necessary intake of food for many households. Hunger was gently addressed, energy maintained, and the body prepared for the evening. Meals were functional, repetitive, and plain, creating a calm, predictable routine. The soundscape of these home meals was subtle. Soft chewing, gentle rustling of cloth, and muted clinking of dishes blended with ambient life. Eating did not disrupt work or rest. It moved with them, quietly supporting survival and calm in this way. Quiet meals between tasks exemplified the medieval approach to daily eating: simple, repetitive, functional, and soothing. Hunger was addressed, energy sustained, and life moved forward steadily, without excitement or indulgence. Food remained a quiet companion, blending with the rhythms of home, work, and rest. As the day drew to a close, medieval households took their final small meals or snacks. These evening portions were quiet, practical, and deliberately plain. Bread, cheese, dried fruits, nuts, or small servings of boiled vegetables were typical. The purpose was simple: to satisfy hunger, provide gentle nourishment, and prepare the body for rest. Bread remained the foundation. Slightly firm or dry, it was broken into small pieces and eaten slowly. Cheese, dense and mild, was paired with the bread or eaten on its own. Nuts and dried fruits provided minor variation in flavor and texture, eaten with patience and care. Each bite was deliberate, taken slowly to encourage calm fullness. Boiled vegetables or thin soups were sometimes included, particularly in colder months. These foods softened the stomach and complemented bread or cheese. The flavors were subtle and muted, requiring no attention or thought. Eating was methodical, quiet, and unobtrusive, blending naturally into the rhythm of evening life. Families often ate together, though conversations were minimal. The sounds of eating, soft chewing, rustling cloth, faint clinking of bowls, merged with the ambient noises of the home: fire crackling, floorboards creaking, or animals settling nearby. The calm atmosphere encouraged slow, deliberate consumption, allowing the body and mind to transition gradually toward rest. Children participated in these evening meals as well. They ate slowly, learning patience and restraint. The bland flavors and soft textures reinforced the notion that food existed to sustain the body rather than entertain the senses. A few pieces of bread or a small wedge of cheese completed their nourishment for the day. Once meals were finished, dishes were set aside, fires dimmed, and the household settled into quiet. The subtle fullness from these small evening portions created a gentle sense of satisfaction. Hunger was addressed, energy maintained, and the body was ready for sleep. Evening meals, like all other food and drink in medieval life, were functional and unremarkable. They were part of a slow, deliberate rhythm that guided daily routines. Eating supported life quietly, creating continuity and calm rather than excitement or indulgence. Through these simple, repetitive habits, the medieval day concluded. Meals and snacks had maintained energy, softened the stomach, and prepared both body and mind for the night. Life moved steadily, predictably, and quietly, leaving only the gentle approach of sleep as the final act of the day. Evening in medieval households sometimes included small, quiet treats like dried fruits and nuts. These were never abundant or exciting. Instead, they were practical, sustaining, and slowly consumed. Raisins, figs, and plums were common, offering gentle sweetness, while walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds provided slow, steady energy. Eating was deliberate, quiet, and calm, reflecting the functional rhythm of daily life. Dried fruits were often soft or slightly chewy. People broke them into small pieces, eating each slowly. A few pieces could be paired with bread or cheese, creating a modest snack that filled the stomach without indulgence. The sweetness was fleeting, subtle, and unremarkable, blending naturally into the evening routine. Nuts were harder and denser, requiring careful chewing. They were eaten slowly, sometimes accompanied by a sip of water or thin ale. The flavors were mild and earthy, leaving the mind calm and the body gently sustained. Portions were small, and consumption was unhurried, reinforcing patience and mindfulness. These evening snacks were practical for children as well. Small portions of dried fruits and nuts taught self-control and methodical eating. Flavors were gentle, textures familiar, and the act of eating quiet and slow. Children learned early that food was for sustenance rather than excitement. Even in wealthier homes, these treats were modest. A few dried fruits or a handful of nuts were served alongside the main meal or later in the evening. They provided mild variety without drawing attention or creating indulgence. Eating remained calm, slow, and soothing. The environment complemented the slow rhythm of these snacks. Soft candlelight or fading daylight illuminated wooden tables and stone floors. Ambient sounds, gentle fire crackle, distant animals settling, muted conversation blended with the quiet act of eating. Each bite became part of the peaceful evening atmosphere. By the end of these small snacks, the body and mind were gently prepared for rest. Hunger had been satisfied, energy maintained, and the rhythm of the day remained unbroken. Eating was functional, soothing, and deliberately unremarkable, creating a natural pathway toward sleep through dried fruits, nuts, and small evening treats. Medieval life reinforced a pattern of slow, deliberate eating. Flavor, quantity, and texture were controlled to maintain calmness and continuity. Food existed quietly, sustaining life and preparing the body for a gentle night's rest. Evening in medieval households sometimes included small, quiet treats like dried fruits and nuts. These were never abundant or exciting. Instead, they were practical, sustaining, and slowly consumed. Raisins, figs, and plums were common, offering gentle sweetness, while walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds provided slow, steady energy. Eating was deliberate, quiet, and calm, reflecting the functional rhythm of daily life. Dried fruits were often soft or slightly chewy. People broke them into small pieces, eating each slowly. A few pieces could be paired with bread or cheese, creating a modest snack that filled the stomach without indulgence. The sweetness was fleeting, subtle, and unremarkable, blending naturally into the evening routine. Nuts were harder and denser, requiring careful chewing. They were eaten slowly, sometimes accompanied by a sip of water or thin ale. The flavors were mild and earthy, leaving the mind calm and the body gently sustained. Portions were small, and consumption was unhurried, reinforcing patience and mindfulness. These evening snacks were practical for children as well. Small portions of dried fruits and nuts taught self-control and methodical eating. Flavors were gentle, textures familiar, and the act of eating quiet and slow. Children learned early that food was for sustenance rather than excitement. Even in wealthier homes, these treats were modest. A few dried fruits or a handful of nuts were served alongside the main meal or later in the evening. They provided mild variety without drawing attention or creating indulgence. Eating remained calm, slow, and soothing. The environment complemented the slow rhythm of these snacks. Soft candlelight or fading daylight illuminated wooden tables and stone floors. Ambient sounds, gentle fire crackle, distant animals settling, muted conversation blended with the quiet act of eating. Each bite became part of the peaceful evening atmosphere. By the end of these small snacks, the body and mind were gently prepared for rest. Hunger had been satisfied, energy maintained, and the rhythm of the day remained unbroken. Eating was functional, soothing, and deliberately unremarkable, creating a natural pathway toward sleep through dried fruits, nuts, and small evening treats. Medieval life reinforced a pattern of slow, deliberate eating. Flavor, quantity, and texture were controlled to maintain calmness and continuity. Food existed, quietly sustaining life and preparing the body for a gentle night's rest. As night approached, medieval people often took small, quiet drinks to soothe the stomach and prepare for sleep. These beverages were functional, mild, and unexciting, designed to hydrate or lightly nourish without creating stimulation. Common choices included thin ale, water, herbal teas, and occasionally milk. Consumed slowly and deliberately, thin ale was perhaps the most frequent choice. Lightly fermented and low in alcohol, it was safe for children and adults alike. People sipped it slowly from wooden cups, enjoying its warmth and subtle flavor. Ale at night was never consumed in excess. Its purpose was to fill the stomach, ease digestion, and create calm, not to entertain or excite. Water, often from wells or filtered through cloth, was another evening beverage. It was plain, clean, and functional. Drinking water slowly helped maintain hydration after a long day of labor or travel. Its quiet simplicity reinforced the rhythm of daily life, emphasizing calm and predictability over flavor or novelty. Herbal teas, made from mint, chamomile, or other local herbs, provided gentle, soothing effects. They were steeped carefully and sipped slowly, offering mild aroma and warmth. Herbal teas helped prepare the body for rest, subtly influencing calmness and relaxation without drawing attention or excitement. Milk, when available, was another mild nighttime drink. It was often warmed slightly and sometimes combined with a small amount of honey or grain flour to add gentle thickness. Milk was nourishing, but never rich or indulgent. Drinking was deliberate and quiet, supporting steady energy and calmness for sleep. Families might gather briefly for these drinks, though conversation was minimal. The atmosphere was calm and dim, illuminated by small candles or fading firelight. Sipping was slow and methodical, blending naturally with the quiet of the evening and the fading activity of the day. Children learned to drink carefully as well. A small cup of thin ale, water, or herbal tea taught patience and mindfulness. Drinks were consumed slowly, reinforcing the deliberate, functional approach to medieval eating and drinking habits. The subtle sounds of pouring and sipping merged with the ambient noises of the household. Gentle fire crackle, floorboards creaking, and distant animals settling. Drinking became part of the evening's rhythm, creating a soothing background for the transition to sleep. By the time nighttime drinks were finished, the body and mind were gently satisfied and ready for rest. Hunger and thirst had been addressed, energy maintained, and the day's rhythm continued smoothly. The quiet, repetitive nature of these drinks reinforced calm, steady routines and supported a peaceful night. As night approached, medieval people often took small, quiet drinks to soothe the stomach and prepare for sleep. These beverages were functional, mild, and unexciting, designed to hydrate or lightly nourish without creating stimulation. Common choices included thin ale, water, herbal teas, and occasionally milk, consumed slowly and deliberately. Thin ale was perhaps the most frequent choice. Lightly fermented and low in alcohol, it was safe for children and adults alike. People sipped it slowly from wooden cups, enjoying its warmth and subtle flavor. Ale at night was never consumed in excess. Its purpose was to fill the stomach, ease digestion, and create calm, not to entertain or excite. Water, often from wells or filtered through cloth, was another evening beverage. It was plain, clean, and functional. Drinking water slowly helped maintain hydration after a long day of labor or travel. Its quiet simplicity reinforced the rhythm of daily life, emphasizing calm and predictability over flavor or novelty. Herbal teas, made from mint, chamomile, or other local herbs, provided gentle, soothing effects. They were steeped carefully and sipped slowly, offering mild aroma and warmth. Herbal teas helped prepare the body for rest, subtly influencing calmness and relaxation without drawing attention or excitement. Milk, when available, was another mild nighttime drink. It was often warmed slightly and sometimes combined with a small amount of honey or grain flour to add gentle thickness. Milk was nourishing but never rich or indulgent. Drinking was deliberate and quiet, supporting steady energy and calmness for sleep. Families might gather briefly for these drinks, though conversation was minimal. The atmosphere was calm and dim, illuminated by small candles or fading firelight. Sipping was slow and methodical, blending naturally with the quiet of the evening and the fading activity of the day. Children learned to drink carefully as well. A small cup of thin ale, water, or herbal tea taught patience and mindfulness. Drinks were consumed slowly, reinforcing the deliberate, functional approach to medieval eating and drinking habits. The subtle sounds of pouring and sipping merged with the ambient noises of the household, gentle fire crackle, floorboards creaking, and distant animals settling. Drinking became part of the evening's rhythm, creating a soothing background for the transition to sleep. By the time nighttime drinks were finished, the body and mind were gently satisfied and ready for rest. Hunger and thirst had been addressed, energy maintained, and the day's rhythm continued smoothly. The quiet, repetitive nature of these drinks reinforced calm, steady routines and supported a peaceful night. As the day came to a close, medieval households prepared for the final act of the daily rhythm, rest. The final meals, drinks, and small snacks had been consumed quietly, providing gentle nourishment and calm fullness. Now, the body and mind were ready to transition into sleep, guided by the slow, repetitive patterns of medieval life. After the last bites and sips, dishes were washed or set aside, fires were dimmed, hearths reduced to glowing embers, and candles burned low. The soft, flickering light created gentle shadows on stone walls and wooden beams, reinforcing the calm atmosphere. Households became quiet, with minimal movement and almost no conversation. The sounds of daily activity faded, leaving only subtle, soothing noises, the distant rustle of animals, the occasional creak of floorboards, and the faint whisper of wind outside. People prepared their sleeping spaces with care. Simple straw mattresses or rush mats were arranged, blankets smoothed, and pillows fluffed. Beds were modest but functional, providing comfort without indulgence. Children were guided into their sleeping spaces, learning early the routines of quiet settling, calm breathing, and gentle relaxation. Nighttime rituals were deliberate and slow. Perhaps a final sip of water, ale, or herbal tea was taken. A small piece of leftover bread or a nut might be nibbled to soothe the stomach. Every act was performed with patience and mindfulness, reinforcing the steady rhythm of life and the calming approach to daily sustenance. The body, having been nourished steadily throughout the day with plain, unremarkable foods, now responded naturally to rest. Hunger had been gently addressed, energy maintained, and the digestive system prepared for the night. The mind, free from excitement or indulgence, followed the same calm trajectory, ready for the quiet release of sleep. Even the ambient sounds contributed to relaxation. Soft night noises, the crackling of dying embers, distant animals settling, and the gentle whisper of wind created a peaceful environment. These subtle sounds, combined with the gentle routine of meals and drinks, guided both body and mind into a state of calm readiness. In this way, medieval life emphasized slow, deliberate, and functional habits. Food, drink, and small routines were never about excitement, indulgence, or stimulation. They existed to support life quietly, maintaining energy and reinforcing calm rhythms. Sleep was the natural conclusion, supported by the predictable patterns of daily sustenance and gentle household rituals. As the household settled, lids closed, candles extinguished, and embers faded, sleep arrived unobtrusively. The body rested, the mind relaxed, and the quiet cycle of life continued, uninterrupted and steady. The rhythm of medieval eating, drinking, and living had guided the day to its natural, soothing conclusion.